Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the Common Good Data Podcast. I am your host, Drew Reynolds. Today, we are going to be talking about strategies for building a culture of data at your organization. And you may remember, if you were listening 2 weeks ago, that we had an episode that talked about what makes for a culture of data at your organization. And we talked about 5 key things like commitment from leadership, that the leader really needs to be able to bring about data and data-driven decision-making as a part of everything that they do. We talked about the importance of data literacy and accessibility. So can staff and members of the organization have access to the data, and are they able to use it and have enough data literacy skills to be able to interact in a meaningful way? And we also talked about governance. So a lot of times for nonprofits, it's about thinking from a board level perspective or from a governance perspective, what are the different policies and procedures you need to have in place in an organization to build out a culture of data. And then lastly, integrating data into all your decision making. So asking those questions, probing your colleagues, the folks that you're working with, about how they might bring data into a conversation and dialogue when you're about to make a big decision. So those are the things that we talked about with that we see as present in an organization that has a strong emphasis or culture around the use of data and data-driven decision making. But there's a broader question about, well, how in fact do you bring that about? So how does that actually happen, and how can you as a leader of your organization start to bring some of those things to the work that you are doing? So before we dive into that, though, I just want to give a quick reminder also to subscribe to this podcast wherever you access it, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and recently, as we just started, on YouTube. Please do leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, add a comment on our YouTube channel, and then, of course, share it with a friend if you can. So someone you think might benefit from this podcast, it'd be great for you to share it so we can continue to grow our audience on this podcast. Okay, so let's dive into it. So I think that there's tons of ways that you can bring about a culture of data in your organization, but I'm going to distill it down to just 3 to make it a little bit easier. And I've learned that it's helpful when people have things in 3s that helps you remember them. So the first one is going to be around the use of ritual, which I think is a really fascinating sociological concept in general. Rituals, are those things that you habitually do, a set of actions or behaviors. It's kind of a situation where you walk into a room and everybody knows what to do. In a religious sense, you might think of this as walking into a church and everybody who goes to that church knows what to do at that time, right? In an organizational setting, it's when you go to a meeting, what are the shared sets of expectations, the unspoken things that are already there and present before we even walk into the room. So a good example of that, I've seen some organizations, what they'll do is they will make it a part of their culture to have a dashboard that has some key metrics on it that is going to be a part of every conversation that they have. If you're doing project meetings, what are the data that you can bring into that meeting and talk about every single time that you meet, so that the next time that you're going to go to that meeting, or your staff know the next time they go to that meeting, that's going to be brought up as a topic of conversation. Sometimes organizations will also focus on a single metric. And I've seen this happen a lot actually in the charter school space, where they might look at college acceptance rates or graduation rates, things like that communicate to the entire community that this is an area of data that you're tracking that's important, but also in a way links to a value. For example, helping students achieve in school and have options for college if that's what they like to pursue. So that's kind of a good example of sometimes using that single metric that you can bring about across an entire organization that helps create that sense of a ritual, something that's habitual, something that's seen. You can also do things like create a data retreat almost, or even if it's just like a meeting on a quarterly or annual basis where your team gets together and looks at metrics. I think that having something that's regular and predictable around the use of data in your organization and your meetings can really help make that something that's an example of something that's expected, something that's like a ritual, right? A second thing you can do is, and this is really more about the interpersonal aspects of the work you're doing as a leader, but I think it's a really important one, which is to so a lot of times as a leader, you might have a staff member reach out and ask you, hey, what should I do in this situation? Can you help me think through this? What's my next step? And as leaders, sometimes you sort of adopt that, oh, I'm being asked for advice. I should give my thoughts here. I should give my advice. But I think what might be an even better response is to go back to that person and say, hey, what do you think? And as you're developing your opinion on this, what data or evidence would you need to go find to help inform your decision so you feel like you would be confident in the decision that you're making? That really changes the mindset of the people that you're working with. It shows that you trust them, that you want them to be involved in decision making. And it also reinforces that data is an expectation in the organization and that you're modeling for them, hey, this is how I would make this decision. So I would like to see you also take the same approach in making the decision on your own. I've been reading a great book called Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. It's very common. It's been out for about a decade or so in the kind of business and leadership space. But there's a phrase in the book that I really love. It talks about shifting the burden of thinking onto your team members so that you're not seen as this sort of like lone genius expert in your working space, but rather that the genius in your organization is something that is shared and is across your organization. You can do that with data too, right? If you only ask data questions to a person who has the most proficiency in data, you're kind of siloing it and saying only that our data person, our data guru, in some cases the evaluator. Sometimes I feel like I'm in that role when I'm working with organizations. That's going to be the person that answers questions on data. But if you shift that responsibility to everyone and say, hey, maybe you invite in a staff member who might feel a little bit more less comfortable working with data, or it doesn't always want to look at statistics, for example, or for metrics when they're talking about making contributions to meetings. I think that's an opportunity to really share the expectation that it's going to be something that everybody participates in, and that you as a leader are not seen as the sole expert in the room, but that expertise is something that everyone builds up in conversation with data and evidence to make decisions. As a part of that, you're really also modeling collective discussion and decision making, which is another really important piece when you're thinking about how to build consensus and energy and movement in your organization around a particular topic. When decisions are more collective in nature, you're always going to have more buy-in. And bringing data and evidence is almost like an impartial and easy third way to bring people into a conversation and debate, so that it's less about them and their thoughts or you and your thoughts. It's less about one person's opinion and somebody else's opinion, but rather you're having a shared dialogue around a shared set of information that you can then use to make a decision together. So to recap, asking questions instead of giving answers in your organization. Try and model that practice. And then third is to celebrate the uses of data publicly. So rewarding examples in your organization, if you're in a position of leadership, highlighting somebody at your next staff meeting that says, hey, this person put together this report. I think they did a fantastic job with it. And I love the way that they used that to inform our meeting here today. I think it's also really important when you're having a meeting with someone to ask them to prepare for that meeting and gather some data or evidence to talk about it. And you don't have to be a statistical wizard to be able to do this. You can talk to maybe somebody who's in the programs or services side of your organization, and maybe they don't feel all that confident about statistics or metrics. Ask them to gather some qualitative feedback, maybe some testimonials from something. Maybe they can share a story of an example of an experience that a client had or a community had when participating in some services, because you can still always engage people on some of the qualitative aspects of their work, even if they feel less confident about more of a quantitative or metrics-driven approach to their work. And so reward those examples. Say, hey, lift it up in a staff meeting. I really thought this was a cool thing. And I think it's important to reward those examples, even if the presentation of data isn't the same way you would have done it, or maybe has some imperfections to it, because it's about the process of starting it and trying it and improving it. And you can still, in that process of lifting up someone who has used data and evidence and decision in a way that maybe they hadn't previously in their work, you can also model for them how to provide positive, but also, needed feedback on how they can improve. And when your organization sees you model how to do that feedback in a positive and uplifting way, but also in a way that pushes someone to improve and to do better, it really starts to permeate throughout your organization. Also, I think it's important to, celebrate the, I guess I would say it like recognizing that people have different abilities and backgrounds when they're going into the work, and to calibrate an ask of that person relative to their abilities. So not asking someone to then go do something really amazing. And it may be, in terms of celebrating uses of data publicly, maybe the best thing to do is to celebrate someone who isn't very confident in data. And if you see a beautiful report that was put together by an evaluator, a data person, somebody who's like an absolute Excel wizard, and you hold that up as amazing, it almost kind of communicates to everybody else in the room, oh, well, that person can do it because they're amazing at it. But for us regular folks over here, we're never going to be able to do that. So we'll clap and move on, but I'll just, place my expertise elsewhere. I actually think that if you celebrate the use of somebody who's done something new and stretch themselves, even if they're not the most skilled at it, that can be one of the most powerful ways to really make data-driven decision-making, as a part of that culture. So a conclusion, 3 things to think about. Number 1, create rituals that highlight data-driven work, something that you habitually do day in and day out. Think about how you structure your meetings. How can you make that as a ritual in the organization in which you serve? Second, ask questions instead of giving answers, asking people to bring evidence and to dialogue and to debate about something instead of you giving your thoughts or opinions right away. And then third, celebrating the uses of data in your organization publicly, especially for those who may feel less confident in their abilities to use data. So anyways, I hope this is helpful for you as you're thinking about bringing about more of a data-driven culture in your organization. As always, follow us at www.commongooddata.com and look forward to hearing what you have to say. Add something to the comments on our YouTube channel or interact with us on social media. We'd love to hear from you. Have a good week.